Welcome to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang from San Francisco. President Trump escalating a war of words with China, but not taking any significant actions and not ripping up the current China trade deal, though the president did say the U.S. would look into taking action to revoke Hong Kong's special status and cut off the United States from the World Health Organization. Meantime, the president waging another kind of war on Twitter. This as widespread protests continue in Minneapolis after the death of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police. The president tweeting, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts." And Twitter, for the first time ever, hiding this tweet and flagging it with a warning for inciting violence in perhaps the riskiest move the social media company has ever taken. We are just getting headlines now from the White House where the president is meeting with industry executives. He said he has spoken to the members of George Floyd's family. He's working with the Department of Justice and law enforcement on the situation in Minneapolis, but doubling down on this comment about looting, saying that looters can't be allowed to drown out peaceful protests. We're going to continue to monitor what the president is saying in Washington right now, and we're going to talk about this a bit more later in the program. But meantime, I want to get a check of the markets. We saw stocks rise, investors seeming to drown out this background noise and hold on to this optimism that they believe the economy is on a path to recovery. I want to bring in our markets reporter, Taylor Riggs, who's been following all the moves of the day. Taylor, break it down for us.
Emily, very interesting. At about 3 o'clock, an hour before the closing bell, you had the president come out and speak in the Rose Garden, talk about breaking from the WHO, talking about China's response over the pandemic as well as their smothering of freedom in Hong Kong. But then he left the Rose Garden, and in the final hour of trading, you had a big comeback in stocks. There's a lot of optimism late in the day with the week and the month coming to a close. You have tech and big tech continuing to be the big outperformers. The NASDAQ 100, the best performer of them all, really brushing off that executive order that you mentioned on social media companies like Twitter and Facebook, and really markets shrugging off the weakest ever print of consumer spending, which dropped 14% in April. All of this means that concerns about the U.S. consumer, while it's pushing the Russell down, as you can see there, 0.5%, leading the NASDAQ higher. NASDAQ is up more than 5.5% this year alone.
Meantime, of course, we know the president has been pushing for the reopening of the economy. He's just said that a never-ending shutdown, quote unquote, would increase the loss of life, tying sort of the economic fallout to, the devastating human toll of this crisis, both a health crisis and an economic crisis. Talk to us about what's going on with Chinese technology, because the president did say something in his remarks earlier today about investigating Chinese companies listed in the United States, hinting at potentially delisting these companies if indeed they were flagged. Talk to us about what's happening there.
Emily, I think what was interesting is the markets might have expected more language there. There was a little bit of a sigh of relief here that there weren't more tariffs involved. There weren't more sanctions involved. There wasn't a specific plan to take action on some of those Chinese companies that are listed here in the U.S. So that's when you saw the stocks, which are the chip makers, big revenue, big supply chain exposure to China, really take off there, because frankly, the markets were looking at some more harsh language. So a little bit of a sigh of relief that no specific plan was put in place, although there continues to be a lot of talk about it. I also want to take a look at the CQQQs. That's the Chinese tech ETF, up 2.6% today, outperforming the Qs, which is the U.S. ETF. All of this means, again, that the market relieved that we didn't get sanctions, we didn't get tariffs, we didn't get details about banning Chinese companies from being listed here in the U.S. Of course, talking about it, but at least no certain action yet. Markets breathing a sigh of relief.
Meantime, under the surface, though, there were some other underperformers that you pulled out. Salesforce, for example. Talk to us about some of these other names.
In the middle of all of this macro drama, Emily, we are getting companies' earnings reports. Salesforce came out today. This is a company that typically outperforms street expectations. And really, for one of the first few times, they lowered the revenue and profit guidance. Analysts were very concerned about that conservative guidance because it's different than what their peers are expecting. Many of their peers have all talked about a V-shaped recovery. Salesforce, though, coming out and saying that we don't see an improvement until 2021. Along those lines, Nordstrom's, I know not typically thought of as a tech company, but they saw a 40% drop in sales. But digital sales, Emily, rose 5% to top $1 billion in the first quarter. The company said that e-commerce business saw growth in new customers of more than 50%. Still, investors not happy. You wonder if the digital growth is not enough to offset the decline in the retail stores, of course.
All right, Taylor, thanks so much. So much more to discuss today. You have a good weekend. Thank you so much for joining us to talk more about the president's remarks on China. Specifically, I want to bring in Amy Kellico, Albright Stonebridge principal. Amy, so good to have you back with us on the show. It certainly seems like U.S.-China relations have hit a new low. What is your reaction to the president's remarks today?
Great to be with you. I have to say I agree with what we just heard from Taylor. I think many of us did breathe a sigh of relief that the president's rhetoric, typical, very much focused on a domestic audience, so harsh rhetoric about China, harsh rhetoric about the WHO, but not a lot of tangible action that is going to immediately put either the U.S. economy or the U.S.-China trade relationship at risk, because I don't think anything happened this afternoon that will invite Chinese retaliation against U.S. companies. And so that is the good news.
So what do you expect then the reaction from Beijing will be?
Well, I don't want to sound overly optimistic about the trajectory of the relationship. As you just said, U.S.-China relations are almost completely in free fall. I mean, the rhetoric from both sides is almost unprecedented in how much we are demonizing the actions of the other government. And so that is absolutely a very, very negative trend that I don't see changing in 2020. But I will say, I am looking at what are the tangible actions we're taking against one another to continue to restrict trade and investment flows. And while the trend is very, very negative, in the short term, we didn't hear anything from the president today that is going to include tariffs or immediate restrictions other than on some students coming into the United States. And so, on trade, we are seeing, policies in Beijing and in Washington actually institutionalizing decoupling. And so that's the very, very negative trend that goes along with this rhetoric. There is long-term action that's negative. But for the markets today, for many of us who were so concerned that the president could have taken immediate action to sanction Chinese government officials, for example, that would have invited a very strong retaliation from Beijing. And so what we're going to hear from Beijing is a lot of rhetoric about how President Trump mischaracterized China's actions on COVID-19, what it's doing in Hong Kong, as well as other issues. I don't think they're going to take strong action against U.S. business or the U.S. government in response.
Still, and perhaps it is more bark than bite, but he talked about studying Chinese companies listed on U.S. exchanges, sanctioning Chinese officials involved in, quote, smothering Hong Kong freedom, restrictions on visas. Could this get far worse?
It absolutely could get far worse. And this is where we do have to, I was listening very closely to what the president actually said he was going to do as a result of this negative rhetoric that he continues to channel. So, for example, what did he say he was going to do? Pull out of the World Health Organization because it is unduly influenced by the Chinese government. But what does that mean to China? Not a lot. He said that he was going to form a task force to study the behavior of the accounting practices of Chinese companies that list on our exchanges. And so, again, not immediate action. Again, I don't want to downplay the significance of this negative rhetoric because it does damage the trajectory of U.S.-China relations. That trajectory just continues to get worse and worse, and that is bad for the United States. As we're dealing with a global health pandemic and, of course, an economic crisis. But President Trump didn't take any action today that will immediately, for example, lead to China pulling out of the U.S.-China Phase 1 trade agreement. And while the agreement is very limited, it does promise purchases of American goods, and that's a good thing this year.
Meantime, we have this crisis unfolding in Minneapolis and a race relations crisis across the country. Compare the fight that he is fighting in China to the fight he's fighting in the United States. While condemning, the quote-unquote smothering of freedom in Hong Kong, he's suggesting the shooting of looters in the United States. How do we make sense of that?
Well, I can tell you the Chinese government is certainly making a lot of that. And so undermining the credibility of the United States on the global stage, talking about human rights abuses of people in Hong Kong or in Xinjiang when these kinds of activities are happening on American soil. And so that does undermine us. I don't want to overlook that at all. And so I think, again, when we look at what President Trump's actions today were, they were meant for this domestic audience here in the United States to distract from these issues that are happening in Minneapolis and to appear very tough. But what was tough was his rhetoric. It was tough. It was damaging to the relationship. But he didn't actually do a lot to, one, change Chinese behavior, or two, punish the Chinese government for behaviors that President Trump finds so abhorrent, and many others do as well. He didn't do a lot about that today.
All right. Amy Calico of Albright Stonebridge, thank you so much. Always good to have your views here on the show. Coming up, we're going to be talking more about President Trump defending his controversial tweet that Twitter has said is promoting violence. Just moments ago, the president telling reporters that he spoke to members of George Floyd's family and that looters cannot be allowed to drown out peaceful protests. We're going to have more on all of this next. This is Bloomberg. A day after signing an executive order targeting social media, the president is escalating his fight with his favorite social media platform, tweeting Section 230, revoke it, in all caps. This latest outburst comes after Twitter flagged a tweet in which the president appeared to be condoning violence against protesters in Minnesota who are demanding justice for the alleged murder of an unarmed man, George Floyd, at the hands of police. Joining us now to discuss Precision Strategies founding partner Teddy Goff, who before that was the digital director for President Obama's re-election campaign. So much to discuss here, Teddy. First of all, what's your reaction to this move that Twitter has taken, perhaps the riskiest move that Twitter has taken in its history?
Well, thanks for having me on. First of all, I just want to say, I think it can't just be people of color. It has to be white people, too, who speak up against police murder and racism. So since I happen to be on television on this extremely dark day, I just want to express my solidarity with the protesters in Minneapolis and my sense of outrage at everything that we've seen this week, especially from the President of the United States. I think that, Twitter and Trump have had a symbiotic relationship and a mutually beneficial relationship for 10 years now. So I welcome the move that they've made. I think it's better than not having made it. But, the fact of the matter is this company and this man have been in an unholy alliance that has helped them both for a long time. What they've done in the past day really doesn't erase a very ugly history here.
Meantime, to that point, President Trump doubled down on his remarks, tweeting some follow-up comments saying, looting leads to shooting, and that's why a man was shot and killed in Minneapolis. It was spoken as a fact, not a statement. It's very simple. Nobody should have any problem with this. These tweets are still up on the platform, and I wonder, California Governor Gavin Newsom said today this is only going to mobilize Trump's base, and you wonder if Twitter's actions could end up just being more favorable to Trump and drawing more attention to him in an election year.
I think there's every likelihood of that. I mean, I think that what's happened here is that Twitter, along with the other social media companies, have created a beast that's obviously out of their control. And I don't just mean Trump personally, although he is the chief protagonist here. I mean, the whole discourse in our country, which is utterly broken and dominated by extremists, especially on the far right, who are often propagating hate speech, targeted abuse at individuals, and disinformation, as we know. And so they've so empowered these voices over the course of the 15 years that we've had these websites in our lives, that now the steps that they can take to limit them are likely to just backfire. And I think that sense of of outrage from the far right that they're being censored is what drove the president's utterly bogus executive action and the rhetoric that they've had for the past few years, that they're victims of manipulation by these social media companies. In fact, they're beneficiaries of the fact that these social media companies never enforce the terms of service that they've had for many years, saying that targeted abuse violates their terms of service, that hate speech violates their terms of service. And if they'd done something about it 10 or 15 years ago, these voices wouldn't have so much power now to come back and fight back against the platforms that have lifted them up in the first place.
Meantime, Mark Zuckerberg has taken a contrary stance to Twitter, saying that companies shouldn't be the arbiter of truth. Facebook has left up similar remarks by the president on Facebook, on Instagram, without any flags. I mean, what do you make of Facebook's inaction here?
I think that Facebook likes to try to move the conversation away from the bigger issues to narrower issues where they think that they've got more of a leg to stand on. In my opinion, fact checking is not the issue here. And Zuckerberg went on Fox, I think it was yesterday, and said that he shouldn't be the arbiter of truth. I think that a lot of reasonable people, including many Democrats, would agree that no private company, and certainly not one run by Mark Zuckerberg, ought to be the arbiter of truth. But that's not really the issue here. All of these companies intermediate your experience with algorithms, and those algorithms make decisions effectively, not human decision making, but automated decision making as to what you see and what you don't. So anytime you log into Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, what's on your screen is what their system has decided is worth your time and worth your attention. And we all know that the way that system works is to optimize for engagement, and engagement often takes the form of outrage. You're much more likely to click on something that riles you up than you are to click on something that is, perfectly satisfactory and normal sounding to you. And that's the reason that these platforms have become such engines of anger and of extremism in both directions,
right,
to be fair. And so, when we talk about fact checking and should the president's tweet stay up or shouldn't the president's tweet stay up, and should the president's Facebook post stay up, I think the key thing to understand is you're already being manipulated by these algorithms. They're already making decisions for you about what you see and what you don't. What they've decided is that optimizing for your attention span, optimizing for your loyalty to their platforms is worth their while and does obviously drive their share prices higher. Whereas, providing a sense of community and reasonable standards of conduct and language isn't.
Teddy Goff there. Teddy, thank you so much for joining us. Coming up, we're going to be talking Uber, more layoffs potentially to come. We're going to speak to our own Joshua Brustein next. Uber rides have plummeted, which has meant much hardship for Uber drivers that have depended on the service for income. Throughout the pandemic, the majority of drivers have been seeking unemployment benefits or loans. Very few of them have been able to get both. Some are getting some government loans designed for small businesses, but many are still waiting for desperately needed financial aid. Joining us to discuss, Bloomberg's Joshua Brustein. Joshua, what options are available to Uber drivers here and other gig economy workers who are also out of work as a result of this, and how successful have they been?
So the answer to how successful they've been is that it's been very mixed. A lot of Uber drivers and other gig economy workers have applied for unemployment insurance. Most are not able to get any from states, but have been able to tap into a new federal program specifically engineered for people who are affected by the pandemic. And a number of Uber drivers, it's unclear how many, have also been able to tap into the federal program to provide forgivable loans to small business owners. I talked to a handful of drivers, some of whom had gotten loans up to over $10,000.
So talk to us a little bit about what Uber is doing itself to help, as the company is making cuts of, seemingly rounds and rounds of corporate employees as well.
Sure. And as you mentioned, Uber has had pretty significant cuts from its direct employees in its offices as well. For the drivers, Uber has always kept an arm's length from the people who drive for the platform. They are not considered employees, they're instead independent contractors. And basically what Uber has tried to do is direct them towards federal programs. It has directed drivers towards the small business loans under the Paycheck Protection Act, and also towards these federal unemployment benefits. At the same time, some drivers and advocates have been unhappy that Uber continues to oppose drivers getting state unemployment assistance. A group of drivers in New York recently sued the company, saying that it was not providing the information that they would need to get those benefits, even though legally they are entitled to them.
Now, Josh, quickly, we're hearing rumblings of even more layoffs at Uber, the company itself. What do you know about that?
I don't know anything specifically about further layoffs. I do know that the company has already cut, I believe, about a quarter of its workforce, closed several dozen offices. Uber had trouble with profitability even before this happened. It has not been a profitable company ever, and the big decrease in demand has certainly not been easy for it.
Okay. All right, Bloomberg's Joshua Brustein. You will keep us posted on that, I'm sure. Thank you so much for joining us. Coming up, companies racing against time and each other, how the race toward a COVID-19 vaccine is going next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. As the world races towards a COVID-19, there's a dizzying amount of new information every day, new studies, types of treatment, new information being released by the minute, it seems. Scientists have now created more than 70 different vaccine candidates. And for investors trying to pin down a winner, well, there may not be one. Joining us now is our Bloomberg Opinion columnist Faye Flam. So Faye, why might there not be a winner, quote unquote?
Well, because there might be multiple winners. I think that when I interview the vaccine researchers, they say, well, we may start with one of the ones that's easiest to develop, and then there may be another one that starts to come on the market. I mean, we're going to end up trying to vaccinate 7 billion people, and so it may be necessary to have more than one. There also may be some that are better at different things. So one that's really effective might be good for healthcare workers, but it might not be easy to scale up to give to everybody else. So there may be another one that's good for helping everybody else develop what we call herd immunity.
Okay, so if there are many winners, what are the chances there's a winner, a first winner, before the end of the year?
That's a good question. We're all hoping that there will be. That is, I mean, it looks like that's sort of the earliest. That's the earliest that people think it could happen is near the end of this year. That's moved up from what people were originally saying. So I think there's been enough progress that people are starting to feel a little more optimistic, especially since a couple of the candidates look pretty good in some of the early human trials. It's hard to put odds on that, though. It's a real possibility now that it could happen before the end of the year.
Now, it's hard not to look at the bad news, the fact that a vaccine has never been developed faster than 4 years, that there still isn't one for HIV after decades of research. Why should we expect that this time will be different?
Well, there are a couple of things. I mean, I think HIV is sort of a bad comparison. It has been kind of unprecedented in the difficulty it's given researchers because it's a virus that people's immune system can't get rid of. Once you get HIV, your immune system won't destroy that virus. It stays with you forever, with a couple of exceptions where people got a bone marrow transplant. But the whole principle of a vaccine is that you simulate the body's immune response, and the HIV actually destroys the immune system. So it's kind of a tough comparison. And then 4 years, well, we have more advanced technology, and there's more urgency. I think the risk-benefit ratio is really different here because what we're doing now can't go on forever. Everybody can't stay home for too much longer. So we need this vaccine fast, and I think the number of people that are working on it is enormous compared to any other vaccine effort ever done before.
Meantime, there's Moderna, there's Oxford, there's Novavax. Are there any sort of comparisons or particular candidates to you that seem to be standing out?
Well, for a while it looked like the Moderna one was standing out, although the headlines have kind of gone back and forth on that. But they have a candidate that's based on RNA, so it's the genetic material, part of the genetic material of the virus, rather than a part of the virus, which is a more traditional vaccine. So it actually kind of fools your body into making some of the proteins associated with the virus, and then that fools your body into making antibodies to those proteins. And then there you would end up protected, and that vaccine would be very easy to scale up. You don't have to grow anything. You can synthesize the RNA. And they've done some human trials. They did find that people did develop antibodies, and they were the type of antibodies that they call neutralizing, meaning it fights the virus. They only released their first 8 patients, I think, in this trial, information from the first 8 subjects. They didn't have the rest of them or didn't have data on the rest of them yet. So it was a little preliminary, and I think there were big headlines, and then people stepped back and said, oh, wait a minute, this is just a little bit of data. We don't have that much yet. And there was also one adverse reaction in a safety trial where somebody got a pretty high fever and reported that he felt really terrible for a day. Then he did feel better after that.
As is the case with vaccines in general, sometimes you can get that feeling, vaccines that have already been approved, that is. Okay, Faye, thank you so much for giving us the update. Faye Flam of Bloomberg Opinion. We'll be watching for more of your commentary on this. Okay, coming up, Theranos and UBS, just 2 among thousands of court cases around the world which are now on hold due to the lockdowns as a result of the pandemic. We're going to talk about the big legal backlog facing companies and investors next. This is Bloomberg. President Trump signed an executive order yesterday to curb the power of social media companies. And as it was happening, David Rubenstein of the Carlyle Group was speaking with YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki on Leadership Live. Take a listen to her reaction.
we have worked extraordinarily hard to make sure that all of our policies and systems are built in a fair and neutral and consistent way. We're a global company, so all of our policies are done at a global level. They're enforced at a global level. And if someone has an issue in terms of how we've handled their specific video, they can always appeal. I will say that I think YouTube and the social platforms have really enabled a broad set of new voices to come and join the conversation. And we've been really proud that across the spectrum, we see a lot of new voices and a lot of new opinions.
So YouTube has had its own challenges in this area. I think the social media executive order is probably due to the fact that Twitter made some comments about President Trump's statements the other day. But you have been in the news in something that happened in China. In China, you have been accused, if that's the right word, or of commenting or taking some words down from a YouTube video that was relating to China. Is there anything you can say about that, or is that not true?
Well, we had an issue. It was an error on our side, and when we were made aware and understood what was happening, we immediately pushed a change to our system to address that. And we did issue a statement saying that it had been a mistake on our side and that we were fixing it and addressing it.
So there's also been a doctor that recently got a fair amount of attention for his YouTube presentations on healthcare and some relating to some medicines relating to COVID-19. And at one point, I think you took down some of his videos, then you put them back up. So is that a kind of problem you always have to verify the accuracy of what somebody is saying?
Well, I'm not sure which doctor that was. There certainly have been a few videos that have been in the news, but I can just say overall that, first of all, we've enabled a large amount of debate and discussion associated with COVID-19, but we've also had some really clear policies. And so the policies have been that if someone is recommending any kind of treatment that would be harmful, like bleach or something that we know would lead to a bad outcome, that would be a violation of our policy. Anything that would cause people to take medically unsubstantiated treatments, so someone theorizing about some treatment, that would be a violation of our policy. And so we have seen different individuals who have posted videos and that have violated those two policies, and as a result, we have taken them down. If a news organization is covering it, then it could be reinstated because it's got context and there's news associated with it. But just a video by itself of someone speaking into the camera saying take this medicine, or and that's something that we know is medically unsubstantiated. And again, we consult with many experts, all kinds of local health authorities around the world. Then that would be something that would be a violation, and we would take it down.
For somebody that's not an expert in how YouTube works, can you explain this? You have how many hours a day of video going on in any given day?
So we have 500 hours uploaded every minute to YouTube. So we have huge amount of volume of video coming in. We have over 2 billion users coming to our site every single month. And so we just have an incredible amount of video across the board and an incredible amount of users. And so we see a lot of responsibility with that to make sure that we are enabling both a broad set of views, but also have the right policies in place.
So how do you get all these people to watch everything that's going on? In other words, does somebody have to complain, or how many do you have, like 50,000 people to just watch everything to say this is okay, it's not okay? How do you do that?
Yeah, that's part of the solutions that we have. And I'll summarize it by saying that we use a combination of humans and machines. And so basically you can think about it that we use the humans to come up with the policies. We consult a broad set of people on those policies. And then we train our machines to go out and look for videos that could be violations of that policy.
Susan Wojcicki there, CEO of YouTube, with Carlyle's David Rubenstein. Meantime, with so many countries under lockdown around the world, that means there has been a backlog, a growing backlog of legal cases, and with courts slowly starting to reopen up, this is a challenge. Joining us to talk about the bottleneck is Sunita Bali, partner at Perkins Coie Law Firm. Sunita, thank you so much for joining us. We're seeing massive court backlogs, which certainly means some massive delays. Talk to us about what this actually means for some of these cases.
Hi, Emily. First, thanks so much for having me. Really good question. Courts are trying to balance the safety concerns for the public and court employees with the need to continue judicial operations, and one of the side effects has certainly been delays. There's a lot of uncertainty around how the various county and state orders impact courts, and that has contributed to a lot of delay. There's been a variety of approaches taken by courts, state and federal courts across the country, as things continue to change rapidly and courts try to find ways to adapt to the constant changes. As you mentioned, some courts are already preparing to reopen. They're putting protective measures in place, such as requiring face coverings or taking temperatures prior to entering the courthouse. And they plan to have some proceedings go forward in business cases in person, whereas other courts have transitioned to conducting hearings by telephone or video conference to keep things moving. For example, in the Northern District of California, where I practice a lot, the courts have essentially created virtual courtrooms, by telephone, where everyone is present: the judge, the clerk, and courtroom personnel, counsel and parties, and even members of the public and the press. They've made dial-in information available to the public so that everybody can participate in the proceeding and observe what's going on. Despite some of the strides that have been made, I think on the use of technology in our court system, there's inevitably delays, and typically criminal cases get priority over civil cases. A lot of courts have continued trials till at least the fall, and sometimes further than that. And so there's a lot of uncertainty about when trials in civil business cases will go forward. We've also seen a lot of judges start to encourage parties to engage in settlement discussions due to all this uncertainty, and some parties have done that.
There's no real precedent for this, and I wonder if this pandemic could be used to fuel a record number of appeals, and if the ultimate result is a lot of these cases getting thrown out.
I don't, at least at the moment, I don't see a huge impact on appeals. I think more so than anything, we'll just see delay. So all of the issues will be decided. It's just going to take a little bit longer to get there. I think we'll see appeals just as we normally see appeals, and again, the Court of Appeal will take those issues up, but all of the hearings will be done remotely, and it may take them a little longer to issue decisions, than under normal circumstances.
President Trump yesterday signed an executive order aimed at curbing the power of social media companies, directing federal regulators to reconsider Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which protects them from legal liability for content that their users post. Of course, there's a lot of things that need to happen legally, in order for that to happen. But do you see potentially a flurry of lawsuits against these companies as a result of this?
That's a good question, and it's a fairly new development, so I'm not really prepared to discuss the impact that we'll see on that. But, it's certainly a hot topic and one that we should closely watch.
What are the biggest legal ramifications that you're concerned about as a result of this? I mean, we're seeing record numbers of employees being laid off. Does that mean, potentially record number of lawsuits against companies, perhaps for how they're handling this?
I definitely think that as things calm down, we're going to see a lot of new lawsuits. I think to your point, we might see more employment disputes. We'll definitely see more business disputes. There's a lot of issues involving leases or other business contracts or agreements, or deals that were in the process of happening that the plug had to be pulled. And so I definitely think we're going to see an uptick in litigation over the course of the next months and probably years due to changes that have been brought about by this pandemic.
So then ultimately, what are some of the most sort of dramatic long-term effects that you think what will the dramatic sort of long-term legal ramifications of the pandemic be?
Well, just to sort of bring it back to our court system, one thing that I think we'll see and that I'm hoping will be a positive and welcome development for most is that I think we'll see a lot more efficiency built into our judicial process. Historically, our judicial system is sort of old school in the way it operates. We still conduct a lot of hearings in person, depositions in person, and oftentimes that can lead to a lot of inefficiencies. For example, if you have a case pending across the country, it's not uncommon for a lawyer to have to fly across the country to appear for a 10 or 15-minute hearing, and that can be, very inefficient, very expensive for clients. And I'm hoping that, but by having to get comfortable with the use of technology, that courts will be more inclined to allow technology moving forward and really embrace the efficiencies that it brings about.
Okay, Sunita Bali of Perkins Coie. Sunita, thank you so much for joining us and weighing in. The president has been answering some questions at the White House, making some remarks on China, saying he believes we need a strong study about China's actions on the virus. Of course, he's accused China of mishandling the pandemic. Also said he's sad about the U.S. relationship, the state of the U.S. relationship with China. We'll continue to bring you more headlines from that as they roll in. Meantime, coming up, gearing up for an historic launch. SpaceX scheduled tomorrow to launch 2 human astronauts into space for the very first time. We'll give you a preview. This is Bloomberg. They were supposed to be in space already, but bad weather changed that plan on Wednesday. Now, NASA and SpaceX are trying once again to launch 2 human astronauts into space, taking them to the International Space Station. The launch now scheduled for 3:22 p.m. Eastern Time Saturday. A lot is riding on this mission. Take a look.
3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition.
After dozens of rocket launches, for the first time ever, SpaceX is finally sending the most valuable cargo into space, 2 human astronauts. Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley will blast off on a mission that could revolutionize how we get to the final frontier.
We're going to have more access to space at a better cost than at any point in human history.
You see, NASA kicked off a new kind of space race, with the government agency awarding $3.1 billion to SpaceX and $4.8 billion to Boeing, an investment that could wind up saving NASA $20 to $30 billion. The 30 years long space shuttle program cost over an estimated $200 billion.
It's been 17 years to get to this point, from 2002 to now. To be frank, I'm a little emotionally exhausted.
That emotionally charged journey for CEO and founder Elon Musk began in 2002 with the creation of SpaceX.
Launch flight operations. Stage 1 propulsion is nominal.
That was designed to make space travel more affordable by reusing booster rockets that can land themselves after a launch, all with this ultimate goal in mind.
I really believe in the future of space, and I think it's important that we become a spacefaring civilization and I'll be out there among the stars.
8 years after the company's founding, SpaceX introduced the Falcon 9, a 2-stage reusable rocket that's been shuttling supplies to the International Space Station since 2012. There have been setbacks as they work to perfect the reusable rocket technology, but since then they've been landing rockets on both land and sea.
Oh, I always thought we would fail, so this is it's all upside. It was worth trying anyway. First 3 launches of Falcon 1 didn't work, and the 4th one we scraped together some parts, and that one worked. And if that one hadn't worked, that would have been it for us.
Other milestones include launching commercial satellites, including dozens of its own Starlink satellites, with an aim to provide space-age internet. The company launched the first recycled Falcon 9 in 2017, a reusable booster that could take part in up to 100 launches. and the Falcon Heavy in 2018. Think 3 Falcon 9s strapped together. And even a Tesla with a human-looking driver on board. No, it's a mannequin. All of these leading to the first test of the Dragon capsule in 2019 that would carry the most valuable cargo, human astronauts. The first launch was unmanned, but it was successful, which is what makes the next launch possible. They'll lift off from Launch Pad 39A, traveling at the speed of 17,000 miles an hour to the International Space Station, and bring them back home, hopefully safe and sound, securing Musk's status as a new kind of space pioneer. Again, that SpaceX launch now scheduled for 3:22 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. That is Saturday. Bloomberg will be covering it live. I'll be watching with my children, who are very excited. Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley are career astronauts. They've gone to space multiple times separately, but this will be their first time going into space together. And hopefully it's a historic one. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone. This is Bloomberg.